An illuminated manuscript is a manuscript where the text is decorated with various illustrations, borders, and bold initials. The most important part of the manuscript is the gold or silver that decorates or illuminates the text. I love how these manuscripts look and wanted to look further into how they were made and attempt to create one myself. Illuminated manuscripts were done by monks and abbeys originally, until production became more commercialized. These manuscripts were expensive to produce and were usually written about Christian themes and stories. The invention of the printing press slowed down the production of illuminated manuscripts. To make parchment for the manuscripts, animal skins were soaked in a lime solution and scraped of all the hair. After being rinsed in fresh water, it stretched on a frame and thinned with a knife. Apparently, calf skin was the highest quality writing surface, and so monks preferred this material, which was called vellum. Papyrus was another material that manuscripts began to be made of later, but it was considered unchristian by the church, as it was used by pagan writers, and so paper was not used until the 11th century. So this is my finished work here, and I'm going to explain kind of just how I got to that point. The first step for me was looking up how to do the actual painting. I wanted to see if it would be possible to make my own paints. From previous knowledge of a Renaissance art history course I took, I knew that egg tempera was a paint that was used in many works. I confirmed that medieval art, and specifically the manuscripts, used egg tempera, and all signs pointed to yes, so I continued with it. My research consisted of watching many videos on the process. I learned how to make egg tempera with pigments, and set out to make my own illuminated manuscript. Lots of the colors are very earthy, as most pigments were made with materials and minerals that were available nearby. Many of the paint colors today kept their names as a direct reference to the minerals that were used to make them, actually. Ochre is a natural clay pigment that creates the color known as red ochre, which is a color name you'll see today in oil paints. I would have loved to go hunt down many of the materials myself, but the snow ruined those plans, so I got what natural pigments I could at a craft store. These pigments are dangerous to breathe in, so proper ventilation and mask is necessary when dealing with these materials. After you have gathered everything you need, painting can begin. To make the egg tempera, you have to carefully separate the egg yolk from the white. Getting the egg yolk on paper towel gets rid of any residual egg white that may have been left over and makes it easier to handle. You then have to poke the egg yolk to let out the yolk, leaving behind a tiny filmy membrane, which will be discarded. Mix the egg yolk with an equal amount of distilled water and a couple drops of white vinegar. This is the solution you add to the powdered pigment. After mixing the two together, you have your paint. You can adjust how much egg you actually put in to the pigment to change the consistency of the paint. For example, on the picture later on, you can see that I have some very, very, very deep blue right up front, and I didn't add nearly as much egg to that as I did to the very light, almost watercolor looking blue that's in the background. So this color here is the yellow ochre, and as you can see, I'm adding the egg solution into it, and then mixing it up just a bit with this tool here, and then I'm able to use it very easily as a paint on paper, actually. And in this case, I did not use a lot of the egg solution, so it comes out very dark. I first sketched out the outline for the picture I wanted to make. I decided to base it off of Arthur's voyage, with his ship and crew front and center, with a map of their exploration behind them. I included a sea monster, because they're fun to draw, and a reindeer to show what Arthur has found on his voyage. First, the gold foil and the lighter colors are done. This was difficult, to say the least, and though I tried my best, I could not make the gold foil look as smooth as in the illuminated manuscripts. Next, you lay down base colors. Egg tempera acts a lot like watercolor paints, but you do have more control over it. From this, you begin building on top of the layers with darker colors each time. At one point, I decided I would do the border in gold foil as well, so I did it a little bit out of order. After laying the gold foil down on the glue, you can simply brush it off very lightly. Usually they polish the gold after, but I was afraid already with how delicate it was that I would tear a bit too much of it off. After the darker colors were laid down, I outlined the whole thing in black. I did not have ink available, and so I just used a thin paintbrush to outline. After waiting for this to dry, I went over it until it was dark enough, and then finished with some bright white highlights on specific areas. This was the final result. Overall, it took about 8 to 10 hours, including the experimentation to figure out what consistency of paint I liked and my long struggle with the gold foil. Illuminated manuscripts are even more interesting to me now after knowing the amount of work that goes in and just trying to do the same thing. Most illuminated manuscripts had religious themes as the center, and these works lasted longer because people would collect and care for them. They were pricey objects. I figured I would try to reflect a bit of Tere's story here to show the importance of this work of writing and how it too deserves the same treatment as the religious texts.